The morning sun of Centauri Prime cast long shadows across the Galactic Academy's main courtyard. Students from dozens of different worlds walked between the tall white buildings, their conversations mixing into a symphony of alien languages. Some had scales that caught the light like jewels. Others had fur that changed colors with their moods. A few floated above the ground on energy fields. Jake Martinez sat alone on a stone bench, watching the other students pass by. His brown hair and simple clothes made him look plain compared to the exotic beings around him. He was one of only 3 humans at the academy, and most days he felt like everyone was staring at him. Not because he was interesting, but because he was so ordinary. The academy bell rang across the campus, its deep tone calling students to their morning classes. Jake picked up his data pad and walked toward the psychology building. Professor Vex High's class was always interesting, even if Jake rarely spoke during discussions. The classroom was a large circular room with seats, arranged in rings around a central holographic display. Jake took his usual spot in the middle row, trying not to draw attention to himself. The other students filed in, chattering excitedly about something. Zeftal, a tall student with crystal-like skin that sparkled blue and purple, slid into the yin seat next to Jake. His species, the Altarians, were known for their curiosity about other cultures. "Good morning, Jake," Zeftal said, his voice making soft chiming sounds. "Did you finish the reading about emotional responses in different species?" "Yeah, it was pretty interesting," Jake replied quietly. He liked Zeftal. Unlike some of the other students, the Altarian never made Jake feel stupid or primitive. On the other side of the room, Quelenara was holding court with a group of his friends. The Vorthan was tall and thin, with green skin and eyes that seemed to look down on everyone. His species believed they were the smartest in the galaxy, and Kalinara never let anyone forget it. "I still don't understand why they let humans into the academy," Quelenara was saying, his voice carrying across the room. "They're barely past the Stone Age. What could they possibly teach us about advanced psychology?" Several students laughed. Jake felt his face grow hot, but he didn't say anything. He was used to comments like this. Most alien species saw humans as young and primitive. Earth had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago, which was nothing compared to civilizations that were thousands of years old. Professor Vex High entered the room, his forearms carrying several data tablets. The elderly Centaurian's horse-like body moved with careful dignity, and his wise eyes surveyed the class. "Good morning, students. Today we will be discussing the psychological factors that drive different species to conflict." The professor activated the holographic display, and images of various alien wars appeared in the air above them. Each species handles aggression differently. Some, like the Kelthans, settle disputes through ritual combat. Others, like the Zephyrians, use complex diplomatic negotiations. A student raised her hand. "Professor, what about humans? How do they handle conflict?" Professor Vex High paused, his expression becoming serious. "Human conflict resolution is complicated. Their historical records are classified under the restricted content protocols." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Restricted content was reserved for material that could be psychologically harmful to other species. It was used for things like biological weapons research or torture techniques. Quelenara laughed loudly. "Restricted content? For humans? What did they do? Throw rocks at each other really hard." More students joined in the laughter. Jake sank lower in his seat, wishing he could disappear. He knew why human history was restricted, but he couldn't explain it without revealing things that would terrify his classmates. "The classification exists for good reason," Professor Vex High said firmly. "Now let's move on to our scheduled topic." But the students weren't ready to let it go. During the break, a small group gathered around one of the computer terminals. Zeftal was typing rapidly, his crystal fingers dancing over the keys. "I'm curious about what's so dangerous about human history," he said. "It can't be that bad. They're so peaceful now." Quilinara leaned over his shoulder. "Probably just embarrassing. I bet they documented every time they stubbed their toe and called it a great battle." Jake stood up from his seat. "Maybe we should just leave it alone," he said quietly. "Oh, come on, Jake," Quilinara said with a smirk. "Don't you want to show us how fierce your ancestors were? I'm sure it's very impressive by human standards." "The system has multiple security layers," another student said, looking at the terminal. "Why would they protect it so heavily?" Zeftal's fingers stopped moving. "I found something. There's a file called Human Historical Documentation, Educational Series. It's locked behind 3 different security protocols." "Educational series?" Quilinara scoffed. "What's educational about primitive tribal warfare? This is ridiculous." Professor Vex High had stepped out of the classroom to speak with another instructor. The students were alone with the terminal, and curiosity was stronger than caution. "I can bypass the first 2 protocols," Heftal said, his voice uncertain. "But I'm not sure we should." "Do it," Quilinara urged. "I want to see what's so scary about human finger painting and cave drawings." Jake stood up suddenly. "Don't," he said, his voice sharper than usual. "Please don't." The other students turned to look at him. For the first time since he'd arrived at the academy, Jake had their complete attention. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking slightly. "Why are you so worried?" Zeftal asked gently. "It's just history." Jake opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. How could he explain? How could he tell them that human history wasn't just history, but a warning? That the peaceful, quiet humans they knew were the descendants of the most violent species the galaxy had ever seen? "It's not what you think," he said finally. "Please, just trust me on this." But Quilinara was already reaching for the terminal. "I'm not going to be lectured by a primitive about galactic security systems," he said. "Let's see what humans consider dangerous." Zeftal looked at Jake one more time, then turned back to the keyboard. His fingers moved quickly, and the security protocols began to fall away one by one. The other students gathered around the terminal, their faces full of excitement and anticipation. Jake remained in his seat, watching them with growing dread. He knew what they were about to see. He knew how it would change everything between him and his classmates. But he couldn't stop them, and part of him didn't want to. Maybe it was time they understood what humans really were. The final security protocol dissolved, and the file opened. The holographic display activated, showing the title, Human Historical Documentation, Segment 1, The Great Wars. Quilinara laughed as he pressed the play button. "Let's see what passes for warfare among the children of Earth." The first images appeared in the air above them, showing green countryside and peaceful cities. The alien students smiled at the primitive but charming scenery. They had no idea what was coming next. The holographic display showed rolling green hills and small villages with simple stone buildings. Smoke rose peacefully from chimneys, and humans in old-fashioned clothes walked along dirt roads. The alien students gathered closer to get a better look. "How cute," said Nira, a female student with soft purple fur. "They look so innocent," Quilinara snorted. "Look at those primitive tools. They're using animals to pull their carts. This is what they consider advanced warfare." The footage continued, showing more scenes of early 20th century Earth. Humans worked in fields, children played in streets, and families gathered around wooden tables. Everything looked peaceful and simple. "I don't understand," Zeftal said, his crystal skin flickering with confusion. "Where's the dangerous content? This looks like a nature documentary." Jake remained silent in his seat, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his desk. He wanted to tell them to stop, to turn off the display before it was too late, but he knew they wouldn't listen. They had to see for themselves. The scene on the display began to change. The date shown in the corner shifted to 1914, and the peaceful countryside was replaced by something different. Rows of men in uniform marched down roads, carrying rifles and heavy packs. The students watched with mild interest. "Oh, a military parade," Quilinara said dismissively. "How organized of them. I bet they fight with sticks and stones." But the footage kept changing. The marching soldiers were replaced by images of massive trenches carved into the earth like scars. The trenches stretched as far as the eye could see, zigzagging across entire continents. Millions of men crouched in the mud, their faces hollow. With exhaustion and fear, the alien students stopped laughing. The scale of what they were seeing was impossible to ignore. These weren't small tribal conflicts. This was something much bigger. "How many soldiers are there?" Nira asked quietly. The display provided the answer. Numbers appeared on the screen, showing army sizes. The students read them in stunned silence. Millions of humans, all armed, all fighting at the same time. "That can't be right," Seftal whispered. "The population of most planets isn't even that large." The footage continued. Artillery shells the size of small vehicles flew through the air, exploding with tremendous force. The sound was deafening, even through the holographic speakers. Entire forests were reduced to splinters and mud. Cities that had stood for centuries were blown apart in hours. A new type of weapon appeared on screen. Green clouds of gas drifted across the battlefield, and soldiers fell where they stood, choking and clawing at their throats. The alien students watched in horror as humans deliberately poisoned the air that other humans breathed. "They're using chemical weapons," Nira said, her voice barely audible. "On their own species." Quilinara had stopped making jokes. His green skin had turned a paler shade, and his eyes were wide with shock. "Why would they do that? They're the same species. They're killing their own kind." The display showed more weapons. Machines that sprayed thousands of bullets in seconds. Cannons that could destroy buildings with a single shot. Devices that filled the air with burning metal, turning battlefields into hellscapes where nothing could survive. Jake watched his classmates' faces as they began to understand. This wasn't primitive warfare. This was industrial-scale destruction, organized and efficient. Humans had turned their intelligence and creativity toward the single purpose of killing other humans as effectively as possible. The numbers kept climbing. Casualty reports scrolled across the screen. Hundreds of thousands dead in single battles, millions wounded. Entire generations of young men wiped out in months. "This is just one war," Seftal said, his voice shaking. "One conflict." The title said Great Wars, plural. As if responding to his words, the display showed the war's end. But instead of celebration, it showed something worse. The humans weren't horrified by what they had done. They were already planning the next war. Maps appeared showing new alliances being formed. Military leaders discussed strategy for future conflicts. Scientists worked on even more powerful weapons. The peace wasn't an end to warfare. It was just a pause to prepare for something bigger. They learned from it, Nira said in disbelief. They studied their mistakes and figured out how to kill more efficiently next time. The display showed the years between wars. Humans developed new technologies, built larger armies, and created more sophisticated weapons. They didn't seem to view the millions of dead as a tragedy to be avoided, but as a lesson to be learned from. 20 years, Quilinara. Read from the timeline. They waited 20 years and then started again. The Second War's opening scenes appeared. This time, the scale was even larger. Entire continents were involved. The weapons were more advanced. the destruction more complete. The alien students watched as human cities were reduced to rubble from the air, as vast armies clashed across. Multiple worlds simultaneously. They're fighting on every continent, Zeftal observed. This isn't a regional conflict. This is their entire species at war with itself. The footage showed new horrors. Systematic killing of civilians. Deliberate. Targeting of non-combatants. Humans had organized mass murder with the same efficiency they brought to everything else. They built factories, Nira said weakly. Factories designed specifically to kill people. They industrialized genocide. The most shocking revelation came near the end of the segment. The display showed a bright flash of light, followed by a mushroom-shaped cloud rising into the sky. Where a city had stood moments before, there was now nothing but ash and radiation. They split the atom, Quilinara whispered. They figured out how to break apart matter itself and used it as a weapon. The casualty numbers for the Second War appeared on screen. Over 60 million dead. Entire nations destroyed. Civilizations that had existed for thousands of years wiped out in a few years. Jake finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear. And they used those weapons on cities full of civilians. Men, women, children, elderly people. All of them burned to ash in seconds. The alien students turned to look at him. For the first time, they saw something different in his eyes. Not the quiet, peaceful human they thought they knew, but something older and more dangerous. Why? Zeftal asked. Why would they do this to themselves? Jake was quiet for a long moment. Because they could, he said finally. Because they were good at it. Because they had the technology and the organization and the will to turn their entire planet into a battlefield. The segment ended with a final statistic that made the alien students gasp. The wars had lasted only 6 years total, but they had involved every major human civilization. In those 6 years, humans had killed more of their own kind than most species had individuals in their entire history. This is why it's restricted, Nira said, her voice barely a whisper. This is why other species aren't supposed to see this. Professor. Vexhi's voice came from the doorway. Students, please return to your seats. Break time is over. The alien students looked up at their professor, then back at the terminal where the display had gone dark. They moved slowly, like they were walking through a dream or a nightmare. Jake remained in his seat, watching them process what they had seen. He knew this was only the beginning. The segment they had just watched was labeled Part 1. There were more files in the database, more secrets waiting to be discovered. Quilinara sat down heavily, his earlier arrogance completely gone. Jake, he said quietly, that was just the beginning, wasn't it? There are more files. Jake nodded slowly. 5 more segments, each one worse than the last. The other students heard him and turned to stare. The peaceful, primitive humans they had dismissed were the descendants of the most violent species they had ever encountered. And this was just the start of their education about what humans were really capable of. Professor Vexhi noticed the unusual silence in his classroom, but said nothing. He had seen this reaction before, from other students who had somehow accessed restricted human files. The discovery always changed how they saw their human classmates forever. Class resumed, but none of the alien students were paying attention. They were all thinking about what they had just witnessed and wondering what other secrets were hidden in the human historical records. Jake sat quietly, knowing that his peaceful days at the academy were over. His classmates would never look at him the same way again. The truth about humanity was out, and there was no going back. The next day, Jake arrived at class to find the same group of students already gathered around the terminal. It looked like they hadn't slept. Zeftal's crystal skin was dim and flickering, while Nira's purple fur had lost its usual shine. Even Quilinara looked shaken, his green skin pale and his eyes haunted. "We have to see the rest," Seftal said when Jake approached. "I couldn't stop thinking about it all night. How could beings capable of such violence seem so peaceful now?" Jake sat down slowly. "Maybe some things are better left unknown." "Too late for that," Quillanara said bitterly. "I keep seeing those images. The gas clouds, the explosions, the cities full of ash. How do you live with this knowledge?" Before Jake could answer, Nira had already activated the terminal. The second segment loaded, titled The Systematic Horror. This time, there was no peaceful countryside to ease them into the topic. The footage began immediately with images that made the alien students step back in shock. The display showed massive camps surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. Humans in striped uniforms moved like ghosts between long wooden buildings. Their faces were skeletal, their eyes empty of hope. But the most disturbing thing was the efficiency of it all. Everything was organized, planned, and executed with mechanical precision. "What are these places?" Nira asked, though part of her already knew she didn't want the answer. The footage provided the explanation. These were extermination camps, built specifically to kill humans on an industrial scale. The alien students watched in growing horror as the process was explained. Humans had identified groups of their own species and decided to eliminate them completely. "They built a system," Seftal said, his voice hollow. "They didn't just kill in anger or during battle. They planned it. They organized it. They made it efficient." The numbers appeared on screen. 6 million dead in these camps alone. But that wasn't the end of it. The footage showed similar camps across multiple continents, each one designed to kill specific groups of humans. The total death count kept climbing. Quillanara suddenly ran from the room, his hand over his mouth. The sound of him being sick could be heard from the hallway. When he returned, his face was even paler than before. "They're the same species," he kept repeating. "They're all humans. Why would they do this to each other?" The footage continued, showing the methods used. Gas chambers disguised as showers, ovens built to burn bodies, medical experiments performed on living humans. The alien students watched in stunned silence as their understanding of human nature was completely rewritten. "This is systematic," Nira observed, her voice shaking. "This isn't random violence. They studied the most efficient ways to kill large numbers of people and then implemented those methods." A new section of the footage began, showing the war itself. The scale was even more massive than what they had seen before. Entire continents were battlefields. Humans fought in frozen wastelands, tropical jungles, vast deserts, and burning cities. No environment was too harsh, no conditions too difficult. The alien students watched human soldiers fight in conditions that would kill most other species. They saw battles where millions of soldiers died in single campaigns. They witnessed the complete mobilization of entire civilizations for the sole purpose of destroying other civilizations. "They're fighting on multiple fronts," Seftal noted. "Simultaneously? How is that possible?" The footage showed human military organization, command structures that coordinated battles across vast distances, supply lines that stretched across oceans, communication networks that kept armies in contact despite being separated by continents. They turned their entire species into a military machine, Quillanara said in disbelief. Every human was either fighting, making weapons, or supporting those who were. The most shocking revelation came when the footage showed the scientific advances made during the war. Humans had used the conflict to accelerate their technological development. They invented new materials, new medicines, new forms of energy, all in service of killing other humans more effectively. "They're learning," Nira said with growing horror. "They're using the war to become more advanced. They're treating mass destruction as a research opportunity." The display showed the development of new weapons, rockets that could cross oceans, bombs that could destroy entire city blocks, submarines that could sink ships from beneath the waves. Each innovation was deadlier than the last, but the worst part was the human faces in the footage. The alien. Students had expected to see monsters, beings twisted by evil. Instead, they saw ordinary humans, soldiers who looked like they could be teachers or farmers, officers who seemed kind and intelligent, scientists who appeared thoughtful and curious. They look normal, Sefdal whispered. They look like the humans we know. Jake had been quiet throughout the viewing, but now he spoke. That's what makes it so terrifying. They weren't monsters. They were just humans. Humans like me. The footage showed the war's end, but the alien students had learned not to expect peace. This time, they watched as the victorious humans divided the world between them and immediately began preparing for the next conflict. They're not even going to try to prevent another war, Quilinara said. They're already planning the next one. The segment revealed the ultimate horror. The atomic weapons they had seen before were just the beginning. Humans had continued developing them, making them more powerful, more efficient, more deadly. They had built enough weapons to destroy their entire planet multiple times over. They call it mutually assured destruction, Jake explained quietly. The idea that if everyone has enough weapons to destroy everyone else, no one will use them. That's insane, Hira said. They're pointing world-ending weapons at each other as a form of peace? The footage showed the Cold War, a conflict where humans didn't fight directly, but instead threatened each other with total annihilation for decades. They built weapons that could kill millions in minutes. They developed delivery systems that could reach any target on their planet. They created strategies for fighting wars that would end civilization itself. They're holding their own species hostage, Zefdal realized. They're threatening to destroy everything they've built rather than lose a conflict. The alien students watched as humans spread this technology across their world. Multiple nations developed atomic weapons. The threat of global destruction became a constant presence in human society. How do they function? Quilinara asked. How do they go about their daily lives knowing that their entire species could be wiped out at any moment? The footage provided the answer. Humans had simply adapted to living under the constant threat of extinction. They went to work, raised families, and built societies while weapons capable of ending their civilization pointed at their cities. They're not just violent, Nira said with dawning understanding. They're incredibly resilient. They can function normally under conditions that would drive other species insane. The segment ended with footage of proxy wars, conflicts where humans fought each other indirectly to avoid triggering global destruction. Even their attempts at peace were forms of warfare. As the display went dark, the alien students sat in stunned silence. They had thought the first segment was shocking, but this was something else entirely. This was evidence of a species that had turned violence into a science. There are more segments, Sefdal said finally. What else could they possibly show us? Jake looked at his classmates, seeing the fear and confusion in their eyes. They were beginning to understand what humans really were, but they hadn't seen the full picture yet. The next segment is about modern human warfare, he said quietly. What we're capable of now that we've had time to improve. The alien students looked at each other, then back at the terminal. They knew they should stop, should leave the remaining segments unwatched. But they also knew they couldn't. They had to see the rest. They had to understand what they were really dealing with. Professor Vex High entered the classroom, but the students barely noticed. They were too busy processing what they had learned about the species they had dismissed as primitive and harmless. Jake remained silent, knowing that his classmates' education in human nature was far from over. The worst revelations were still to come. 3 days had passed since the alien students discovered the second segment. Word had spread quietly through the academy, and now a larger group gathered around the terminal each morning. None of them spoke about what they were doing, but they all understood the need to know the truth. Jake found himself at the center of unwanted attention. Other students stared at him in the hallways, whispered when he passed, and kept their distance during meals. Some looked at him with fear, others with fascination, but none with the casual friendship he had briefly enjoyed. "Are you okay?" Zeftel asked as they prepared to watch the third segment. His crystal skin had remained dim for days, a sign of deep distress among his people. Jake shrugged. "I'm used to it. This is how most species react when they learn about human history." Quilinara, who had once mocked Jake openly, now spoke to him with careful respect. "Why didn't you warn us more strongly? Why didn't you tell us what we would?" "See? Would you have believed me?" Jake asked. "If I had told you that humans were the most violent species in the galaxy, would you have taken me seriously?" The alien students considered this. They all knew the answer. They had seen Jake as primitive and harmless. Nothing he could have said would have prepared them for the truth. Nira activated the terminal with shaking hands. The third segment began, titled The Evolution of Warfare. This time, the footage started in the 1950s and moved forward through time, showing how humans had developed their military capabilities during the decades of peace. The first images showed missile tests, rockets that could travel across continents in minutes, carrying warheads that could destroy entire cities. The alien students watched as humans perfected the art of long-distance destruction. They can hit any target on their planet within an hour, observed Crix, a new student who had joined their group. His species had tentacles instead of arms, and they writhed nervously as he spoke, but the missiles were just the beginning. The footage showed the development of biological weapons. Humans had created diseases that could kill specific types of people while leaving others unharmed. They had weaponized nature itself. "They're designing plagues," Nira said in horror. "Diseases that target genetic markers. They could theoretically create a weapon that would kill only their enemies while sparing their allies." The display showed research laboratories where humans in protective suits worked with substances that could end civilizations. They approached the creation of species-ending weapons with the same methodical care they brought to everything else. "This is recent," Zeftal noted, reading the dates on the footage. "Some of this research is less than 50 years old." The footage moved to space-based weapons. Humans had militarized their orbital zones, placing weapons platforms among the stars. They had turned their entire solar system into a fortress. "They're not just fighting on their planet anymore," Quilinara said. "They've moved their warfare into space itself." The alien students watched as humans developed weapons that could destroy asteroids, disable satellites, and create artificial meteor showers. They had learned to weaponize space debris, turning innocent rocks into planet-killing projectiles. "They're thinking on a stellar scale," Crix observed. "They're not just planning to fight each other. They're preparing to fight anyone who might threaten them." The most disturbing revelation came when the footage showed human strategic planning. Military leaders discussed scenarios that included fighting alien species. They had developed battle plans for enemies they had never met, weapons designed to work against biology they had never encountered. "They're planning to fight us," Nira whispered. "They joined the galactic community, but they're prepared to go to war with it." Jake had remained quiet during most of the viewing, but now he spoke up. "Every human military installation has contingency plans for alien contact. We hoped for peace, but we prepared for war." The footage showed the development of adaptive weapons systems. Humans had created machines that could analyze alien biology and develop countermeasures in real time. They had turned their ability to learn and adapt into a military advantage. "They're not just violent," Zeftal realized. "They're incredibly intelligent about their violence. They think through every possibility, plan for every scenario. The display showed human peacekeeping forces, but now the alien students understood what they were really seeing. These weren't just soldiers maintaining order. They were the visible representatives of a species that had mastered every form of warfare. Look at their equipment, Quillinara pointed out. Even their peacekeepers carry weapons that could level city blocks. They call it maintaining order, but they're really demonstrating their capability. The footage revealed the true scope of human military preparation. Hidden facilities on every continent. Weapons stockpiles that could supply armies for decades. Training programs that could turn ordinary civilians into soldiers in weeks. They're not just ready for war, Nira said with growing understanding. They're always at war. They've organized their entire society around the assumption that conflict is inevitable. The segment showed how humans had integrated military thinking into civilian life. Their transportation systems could be converted to move armies. Their communication networks could be militarized instantly. Their manufacturing could produce weapons instead of consumer goods within days. They've built their entire civilization to be a weapon, Crick said in awe. Every aspect of human society can be turned toward military purposes. The most shocking revelation came near the end of the segment. The footage showed classified human assessments of other galactic species. Humans had studied every member of the galactic community, identifying weaknesses, developing strategies, planning for potential conflicts. They know how to fight us, Zeftal said, his voice barely audible. All of us. They've studied our biology, our psychology, our military capabilities. They know exactly how to defeat every species in the galaxy. The display showed human intelligence, networks that spanned multiple worlds. Humans had infiltrated other civilizations, gathered information, and prepared detailed battle plans. They had done all of this while maintaining the appearance of peaceful cooperation. We thought we were studying them, Quillinara said in disbelief, but they were studying us. They know more about us than we know about ourselves. The footage revealed the ultimate truth about human military capability. They hadn't just prepared to fight other humans. They had prepared to fight anyone and everyone. Their weapons, their strategies, their entire military philosophy was designed to defeat any possible enemy. They're not just violent, Nira said with dawning comprehension. They're the most sophisticated military force in the galaxy. They've spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare. The segment ended with footage of human children playing war games in schools. The alien students watched in horror as young humans learned military tactics and strategy as part of their basic education. They're training their children, Crix said. They're passing down thousands of years of military knowledge to the next generation. Jake finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. Every human child learns military history. We study famous battles, analyze successful strategies, and memorize the lessons of past conflicts. We call it education, but it's really military training. The alien students stared at him, seeing him with completely new eyes. Jake wasn't just a quiet student from a primitive world. He was a member of the most militarily advanced species in the galaxy, trained from childhood in the art of warfare. Why? Zeftal asked. Why do you prepare for so much violence if you want peace? Jake was quiet for a long moment. Because we've learned that peace is only possible when you're stronger than anyone who might want to take it away from you. The display went dark, but the alien students remained frozen in their seats. They had thought they understood human nature after the first two segments, but now they realized they had only seen the historical foundation. Modern humans weren't just violent. They were the most capable warriors in the galaxy, Professor Vex High entered the classroom and immediately noticed the unusual tension. His wise eyes surveyed the group of students, then settled on Jake. I see you've been continuing your research, he said quietly. Have you learned what you wanted to know? The alien students looked at each other, then back at their professor. They had learned more than they wanted to know, but they still weren't finished. There were still more segments to watch, more truths to discover. There are 2 more files, Nira said quietly. What else could they possibly show us? Jake looked at his classmates, seeing the fear and fascination in their eyes. They were beginning to understand what humans really were, but they hadn't seen the full picture yet. The next segment shows what happens when humans actually go to war, he said. What we're capable of when we stop holding back. The alien students felt a chill of fear. Everything they had seen so far was just preparation, just readiness. They hadn't yet seen what humans did when they actually unleashed their full potential for violence. They were about to learn why the rest of the galaxy was so careful around the peaceful species from Earth. A week had passed since the alien students began their journey into human history. The group around the terminal had grown to include nearly half the class, but they maintained their silence about what they were discovering. Jake had become an odd object of fascination and fear, with students approaching him carefully to ask questions about human nature. The atmosphere in the classroom had changed completely. Where once there had been casual chatter and friendly debates, now there was a tense quiet. Everyone was processing what they had learned, trying to understand how they had so completely misjudged an entire species. Are you ready for this? Zeftal asked as they prepared to watch the 4th segment. His crystal skin had remained dim for days, and he looked like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. Jake nodded grimly. This one is different from the others. It's not about what humans did to each other. It's about what humans do when they're really threatened. Nira activated the terminal with trembling hands. The 4th segment loaded, titled The Unleashed Species. Unlike the previous segments, this one began with a warning message in multiple languages. The following content contains documentation of human military actions during existential threats. Viewer discretion is advised. The footage began with scenes that seemed almost peaceful compared to what they had already witnessed. Humans in modern uniforms, using advanced but conventional weapons. The alien students had become accustomed to seeing massive battles and industrial-scale destruction. This doesn't look so bad, Quilinara said hopefully. Maybe modern humans have learned to control their violent instincts. But Jake shook his head. Keep watching. This is just the beginning. The display showed a conflict that had occurred during humanity's expansion into space. A hostile alien species had attacked human colonies, killing millions of civilians. The alien students watched as humans responded with measured, professional military action. They're showing restraint, Nira observed. They're not using their most powerful weapons. They're trying to minimize casualties. The footage continued, showing human forces defending their territory with impressive skill but notable restraint. They seemed to be following rules of engagement, trying to protect civilian populations on both sides. This is what we expected, Crick said. Professional soldiers fighting a defensive war. This is the kind of conflict we understand. But then something changed. The hostile aliens made a critical mistake. They attacked Earth itself, targeting civilian population centers with weapons of mass destruction. The footage showed entire human cities burning, millions of innocent people dying in minutes. Jake's voice was quiet when he spoke. This is when humans stopped holding back. The change was immediate and terrifying. The measured, professional military response disappeared, replaced by something that made the alien students step back from the display in horror. Humans had switched from defensive warfare to something else entirely. They're not following the same rules anymore, Zeftal observed with growing alarm. They're not trying to minimize casualties. They're trying to maximize them. The footage showed human forces using weapons they had held in reserve. Biological agents that targeted the alien species' specific physiology. Nanobots that could disassemble. Matter at the molecular level. Energy weapons that could sterilize entire planets. They had these weapons all along, Quilinara said in disbelief. They were choosing not to use them. They were showing mercy. The alien students watched in stunned silence as humans demonstrated their true military capabilities. They didn't just defeat their enemies, they eliminated them completely. Within months, the hostile species that had attacked Earth simply ceased to exist. They committed genocide, Nero whispered. They wiped out an entire species in retaliation for attacking their home world. But the most disturbing part wasn't the scope of the destruction. It was the efficiency. Humans had planned for this scenario, prepared for it, and executed it. The same methodical precision they brought to everything else. They're not angry, Crix realized. They're not emotional about this. They're just efficient. They identified a threat and eliminated it completely. The footage showed human leaders discussing the conflict with calm, professional demeanor. They spoke about the extinction of an entire species, the same way they might discuss a construction project. It was just another problem to be solved. There, treating the death of billions of beings as a logistics challenge, Seftal said in horror. They're not even pretending to be upset about it. The display showed the aftermath of the conflict. Humans had not only eliminated their enemies, but had also claimed their territory, their resources, and their technology. They had turned genocide into a form of expansion. They're not just violent, Nira said with dawning understanding. They're practical about their violence. They don't waste anything, not even their enemies' deaths. The segment moved to other conflicts showing similar patterns. When humans felt truly threatened, they didn't just fight back, they eliminated the threat completely. They had developed a doctrine of total warfare that made their historical conflicts look restrained by comparison. This is what they're capable of now, Jake said quietly. When humans decide that another species is a threat, they don't just defeat them. They make sure they can never be a threat again. The alien students watched footage of human military installations being built throughout the galaxy. Humans had positioned themselves to respond to any threat with overwhelming force. They had turned their entire civilization into a weapon pointed at the rest of the galaxy. They're not just preparing for war, Quilinara said. They're preparing for the complete elimination of any species that threatens them. The most chilling revelation came when the footage showed human assessments of other galactic species. Each evaluation included detailed plans for complete elimination if necessary. Humans had studied every member of the galactic community and developed strategies for their destruction. They know how to kill us all, Seftal said, his voice barely audible. Every species in the galaxy. They figured out how to eliminate each of us completely if they decide we're a threat. The display showed human diplomatic efforts, but now the alien students understood what they were really seeing. Human diplomats weren't just negotiating. They were gathering intelligence, identifying weaknesses, and positioning their species for potential conflicts. Every human we've met, Nira said with growing horror. Every diplomat, every trader, every student, they're all part of this. They're all gathering information for potential military use. Jake had remained quiet during most of the viewing, but now he spoke up. Every human who leaves Earth is trained in intelligence gathering. We're taught to observe, to learn, to report back about potential threats and opportunities. The alien students stared at him, seeing him with completely new eyes. Jake wasn't just a student. He was a spy, a scout, a representative of the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Why are you telling us this? Crix asked. Why are you revealing your species' secrets? Jake was quiet for a long moment. Because you need to understand what you're dealing with. Humans aren't your enemies, but we're not harmless either. We're the most dangerous species in the galaxy, and we choose to be peaceful. A segment ended with footage of human children learning about these conflicts in school. The alien students watched in horror as young humans studied the complete elimination of other species as part of their regular education. They're proud of it, Quilinara said in disbelief. They teach their children about genocide as if it's something to be celebrated. We don't celebrate it, Jake said firmly. We study it. We learn from it. We make sure our children understand what humans are capable of when we're truly threatened. The fifth and final segment began automatically. It was titled The Choice of Peace, and it showed something the alien students hadn't expected. It showed humans actively choosing not to use their capabilities. The footage revealed the true scope of human military power. Weapons that could destroy star systems. Biological agents that could eliminate entire categories of life. Technologies that could reshape matter itself. Humans had become capable of ending all life in the galaxy if they chose to. They could destroy everything, Nira whispered. They have the power to end all life everywhere. But the footage also showed something else. It showed humans deliberately limiting themselves, choosing restraint, actively working to prevent conflicts rather than win them. They had become so powerful that they had to consciously choose peace. They're not peaceful because they're weak. Zeftel realized. They're peaceful because they're so strong that war would mean the end of everything. The display showed human institutions designed to prevent conflict. Diplomatic corps trained to resolve disputes peacefully. Military leaders who studied how to avoid war rather than win it. Scientists who developed defensive technologies instead of offensive ones. They've turned their intelligence toward peace, Crick said in amazement. They're using the same skills that made them such efficient killers to prevent killing. The final revelation came when the footage showed human psychology. The alien students learned that humans were naturally violent, naturally territorial, naturally inclined toward conflict. But they had recognized this about themselves and had consciously chosen to be different.